Toni Morrison's monograph, Playing in the Dark. This short, brilliant work of literary criticism helps expose how this canon of literature was affected by America's racist history. It reveals in a nutshell that though people of African descent in the United States were emancipated from slavery, how much further there is to go to true liberation. Toni Morrison states quite clearly that when you study American literature as a canon, it becomes evident that the purpose of this literature historically has been to create the identity of the new white American man. This was unsurprising. And yet a significant insight was gained by Toni Morrison when she switched from being a reader, from reading as a reader, to reading as a writer. See, we're so used to reading as a reader, and that is an important thing. And I want to say something about that, which is novels are essential. Novels are for adults what children's stories are for children. They help us work out the things that we are learning how to do in life, how to discover and strive, cope with loss and failure, to understand betrayal and how to trust. In short, novels help us expand our experience of the human condition, help us step into contexts and situations that we might not always have experienced firsthand, but could live through the novel. When you read as a reader, though, and novels are informed by our racialized and racist society, one as a reader accepts those things as true and given. But when Toni Morrison began to read as a writer, she understood, of course, being Toni Morrison, how writers work. So what writers have, of course, is a great deal of control over their novel, over their characters, over the plot, over what those characters know and how those characters are protagonists or antagonists or serve some critical function in the story's development. But she also understands that writer's control is circumscribed. It's circumscribed because at a certain point, both the characters and the plot have a life of their own. You launch them in a certain direction. And there's also a context of understandings about what shapes our world or our society. And so at a certain point, an author will lose the reader if their character or the plot or what is happening simply seems unbelievable. And when that happens, the writer has failed in a particular way. So when Toni Morrison began to read as a writer, understanding these rules of writing, what she discovered was not merely that American literature is focused on creating this identity of the new white American man, but also that there were many critical characters that she gives the identity Africanist to instead of Black or African American or any of the other terms that have been used in the course of our linguistic history. These Africanist characters served a function, and the function was to help create that white identity. These Africanist characters would work to create that white identity. And they'd also serve in a very critical fashion, like a necessary, the plot, the story, the book depended upon them fashion to help mitigate certain essential themes of the American character. Morrison notes that major characteristics and themes within our national literature, themes such as individualism, masculinity versus femininity, social engagement versus withdrawal, acute and ambiguous and promising moral problematics, themes such as innocence and figurations of death and hell, i.e. themes that are not just present in literature, but also within the faith landscape, are in fact responses to a dark, abiding, and signifying Africanist presence. Toni Morrison states furthermore that nearly every part of American life, American decision-making, American debate, has in some ways been informed by the presence of Africans or their descendants. Why should literature be any different? What this has led to is that when a piece of literature is critically dependent on an Africanist character playing a functional role, i.e. that character doesn't exist for his or her or themselves, but exists solely in service to another, then that Africanist character can never truly be set free. I truly hope that you read Toni Morrison's Playing in the Dark for its own sake. It's a provocative, thoughtful, challenging, and inspiring work. But I also want to draw it home into the questions at the heart of our Unitarian Universalist faith community, and think about how the framework that she applied to American literature can also be applied to the American religious landscape. Let's go back to the beginnings. It's no surprise to me, having considered Morrison's work and the influence that the presence of Africans and their descendants have had upon our culture and our nation's decision-making, that the earliest theology of first the colonies and then the early United States was predominantly Calvinist. The Calvinist theology that said that there was a predestined salvation of a few. Sometimes I've heard as few as 1 in 45,000, that those few would be picked out by God, sometimes regardless of their behavior or ethical or unethical choices in life, to be saved, to be reunited with what is holy. The rest were damned to misery, exploitation, torment. How can this theology be a surprise when it was so descriptive of the experiences of so many enslaved peoples upon our shore? It also shouldn't be a surprise that Unitarians and Universalists had a response to this, a theological response. William Ellery Channing said, "Be careful how you live. It's the only sermon you'll ever preach." He was talking about a different kind of salvation, not a salvation where some God has a few beloveds. No, Channing was talking about salvation by character, that one would essentially save oneself by living ethically, spiritually, mutually, by seeking to be one with justice and kindness, to apply a lens of humanity and dignity to all. And I will note in Channing's case, apply that dignity and humanity to our enslaved brethren. The Universalists also had a response. The response was a universal promise of salvation, a promise of salvation based on universal love, a love that was promised to every single human being, no matter their status, no matter their mother or father, no matter if they had any family they could legally claim at all. This promise of salvation was based on love. It was based on an understanding of God's love for human beings, how God considered each person to be a child of the sacred universe, worthy already. The Universalist salvation encouraged its practitioners to mirror and express that kind of benevolent love to one another. Those theologies acknowledged, just as there is a gap between emancipation and liberation, so too was there often a significant gap between abolitionists, of which a notable number of Unitarians and Universalists were, and those who were anti-racists. William Ellery Channing was one of our faith ancestors who asked the question, how does slavery affect the spiritual development of the person who was enslaved? How did slavery affect the spiritual development of the person called master? Toni Morrison asks us to consider this as well, to look into the mind, imagination, and behavior of those who are oppressed. But also she considers equally as valuable the effort to understand what racial ideology or racialized practices do to the mind, imagination, and behavior of those who have the power to oppress. Let us think about that question faithfully this morning. How do we Unitarian Universalists today replicate the patterns of white identity formation that Morrison critically identifies in her monograph? If you are a white identified UU, do you knowingly or not seek a personal spiritual transformation? For instance, knowing oneself to be good, to be anti-racist, worthy of the beloved community. Do you seek that from our fellow congregants of color? If you are a person of color, have you been engaged thus? When more people of color attend our congregations, do we feel that their presence indicates something positive about who we are? For instance, that we are anti-racist, inclusive, or cool. How important is that to us in comparison to understanding why this newcomer or newcomers have come? What changes might be needed so that we can mutually grow from our presence with one another? We do not want, expect, or ask for perfection. But what we are seeking together is to unhobble our faith, unhobble our personal development from the racialized patterns into which we were born and have grown accustomed to. I have full hope and deep faith that we, as a loving and mutual beloved community, can rise to the challenge, can accept invitations into creating a whole and meaningful, affirming, and spiritually informed faith for each and every one of us. Let us work together to make it so.